Daniel realized he had been erased in the span of a single scroll. His thumb moved down his phone screen, and with every photo, the truth pressed harder against his chest. The wedding had happened. Everyone was there. Everyone except him. His cousin stood under a white arch, smiling like nothing in the world could touch her. His aunts and uncles leaned together, proud and relaxed. His mother stood near the front row, dressed carefully, smiling carefully, as if the day had gone exactly as planned. Daniel stared until the images blurred. There was no empty seat where he should have been. No sign that anyone had noticed his absence. The worst part was that he hadn't been confused. There was no shock, no frantic checking of messages. Deep down, he had known. Days earlier, when he'd asked his mother about the wedding details, her face had tightened just enough for him to notice. She hadn't looked at him while she spoke. She'd stayed busy with small tasks, folding napkins, adjusting flowers, keeping her hands moving so she wouldn't have to meet his eyes. That was when she said it, softly and firmly, like a final decision that had already been approved by everyone else. "It's better if you don't come," she told him. "You'd bring tension. I don't want you to ruin her day." At the time, Daniel had laughed, because laughing was easier than breaking. He told himself she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that she would change her mind, that an invitation would still appear. Families didn't do this. Not really. Not to their own. But now the proof was everywhere. Tagged photos. Happy captions. A perfect day that had gone on without him. Daniel set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The apartment felt too quiet. The silence pressed in, making every thought louder. He tried to remember the last time he'd felt fully welcome in his family. The memory slipped away before he could grab it. There had always been something about him that made people uneasy. He asked questions others avoided. He remembered things people wanted forgotten. He didn't smooth things over when silence felt easier. Over the years, he had been called difficult, intense, dramatic. Not directly. Never to his face. It came in looks, in pauses, in conversations that stopped when he entered the room. He had learned to notice those things early. He had learned what they meant. Still, he hadn't expected this. A wedding was supposed to be one of those moments where family lines blurred, where old issues were set aside for the sake of togetherness. Instead, it had become proof that Daniel existed outside the circle. He wasn't just unwanted. He was considered a risk. His phone buzzed again. More photos. Someone had posted a video of the first dance. Laughter filled the screen, even though the sound was muted. Daniel felt something tighten inside him, sharp and hot. This wasn't sadness anymore. This was humiliation. He stood and walked to the window. Cars passed below. Strangers moving through their own lives. Unaware that his had just shifted. He wondered how many people at that wedding had asked about him. How many had noticed he wasn't there, and accepted the answer they were given. He could imagine it easily. Daniel couldn't make it. Daniel's busy. Daniel's complicated. No one would question it. They never did. His mother's words replayed in his head. Clearer now than they had been before. You'd ruin her day. Not you might feel uncomfortable. Not it's complicated. Just that. As if his presence alone carried damage. As if he was a storm that had to be kept away from clear skies. Daniel pressed his forehead against the glass. Anger rose, slow but steady. Not wild rage, but something colder. Something that stayed. He thought about all the times he had swallowed his feelings to keep peace. All the apologies he had made first, even when he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. All the moments he had been asked to be quieter, calmer, easier. And now the betrayal wasn't just the lack of an invitation. It was the decision behind it, the conversation he hadn't been part of, the agreement, spoken or unspoken, that excluding him was reasonable, necessary. Even Daniel turned away from the window and walked back to the table where his phone lay. He picked it up again, not to look at the photos, but to open his messages. There was nothing from his mother. No follow-up, no check-in. She hadn't asked how he felt. She hadn't needed to. In her mind, the matter was settled. That was when a new thought surfaced, quiet but powerful. They thought he was harmless if ignored. They believed silence would keep him small. Daniel sat down slowly. His breathing steadied as his mind began to move in a new direction. He knew his family's stories. He knew which ones were incomplete and which ones were outright lies. He knew the sacrifices that had been hidden, the blame that had been shifted, the moments where truth had been softened, until it barely resembled itself. For years he had carried those things alone, telling himself it wasn't worth the trouble, that exposing old wounds would only hurt everyone, including himself. But now he wondered who had been protecting whom. The wedding had gone on without him. Clean and joyful. His absence had made things easier. That much was clear. And that clarity changed something inside him. If his presence was considered a threat, then maybe the threat wasn't his behavior. Maybe it was what he knew. Daniel didn't smile. There was no satisfaction yet. Only resolve, forming quietly in the space where hurt had been. He wasn't sure what he would do with it. Not yet. But he knew one thing for certain. He would never forget this moment. The day his entire family celebrated love and unity by deciding he didn't belong. The days after the wedding moved too slowly and too fast at the same time. Daniel went to work, answered emails, spoke when spoken to, and nodded through conversations that felt far away. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, every thought circled the same question. What did they think he would do if he had been there? That question followed him everywhere. On the bus, in the shower, late at night when sleep refused to come. His family had not just left him out. They had judged him. They had decided he was unstable enough, unpredictable enough, to be removed from a celebration meant to bring people together. That judgment cut deeper than the exclusion itself. Daniel began replaying old moments, ones he had brushed aside before. The time his uncle had asked him to stay quiet during a family dinner because this wasn't the place. The birthday where his aunt changed the subject when Daniel brought up the past. The way his mother always stepped in, smoothing things, over-apologizing on his behalf even when he hadn't spoken yet. He saw the pattern clearly now. He wasn't difficult. He was inconvenient. That realization sharpened his thoughts. Anger no longer burned. It focused. Daniel knew things his family assumed he never would use. Over the years, he had been trusted with truths because people believed he was loyal, because he stayed silent, because he carried guilt that was never fully his. He remembered whispered conversations in kitchens, late-night confessions framed as burdens he was strong enough to hold. At the time, he had felt needed. Now he understood he had been useful. At night, he sat at his desk and opened old folders on his computer. Messages, documents, notes he had kept without knowing why. He didn't rush, he didn't panic. Each piece of information brought clarity, not excitement. He saw how fragile their peace really was. How easily the story could change if certain facts came into the light. The idea of revenge formed slowly. Not as chaos, not as public shame, but as balance. A correction. If they believed excluding him kept everything clean, then showing the truth would be the opposite of silence. It would be controlled, thoughtful, impossible to dismiss. Yet every plan carried weight. Daniel imagined his mother's face if he spoke. Not anger, but disappointment. The kind she had always used to pull him back into line. He imagined family members calling him selfish, dramatic, cruel. He could already hear the words. He had heard them before. The conflict tightened inside him. Part of him wanted justice. Another part wanted peace. The problem was that peace had always required his silence. Revenge promised release, but it also promised isolation. Once spoken, some truths could not be taken back. Daniel tried to distract himself. He went for long walks, letting the city noise fill his head. He watched couples laugh, families argue, strangers pass without history. No one here knew his role. No one expected him to be anything. The freedom felt strange, almost unreal. One evening he sat on a bench as the sky darkened. His phone buzzed with a family group message. Photos from the wedding were still being shared. Inside jokes. Memories being built without him. Daniel stared at the screen, feeling both invisible and exposed. They were comfortable now, confident that the decision had been right. That confidence made something shift. Daniel wasn't angry because he was left out. He was angry because he had been reduced, turned into a risk instead of a person. His absence had been framed as protection, not rejection. That story only worked if he accepted it. Back at his apartment, he wrote drafts he never sent. Messages that explained everything. Others that cut straight to the point. He deleted them all. Words alone wouldn't change the dynamic. They never had. Instead, he began to plan quietly. Not with excitement, but with care. He thought about timing, about impact, about what outcome he actually wanted. Did he want them to hurt? Or did he want them to understand? He wasn't sure which mattered more. Sleep came in short bursts. When it did, his dreams were crowded with unfinished conversations. In one, he stood at the wedding, watching people turn away as he spoke. In another, he walked past the venue. Without stopping, unseen but free. He woke from both with the same tight feeling in his chest. The moral weight of his choice pressed down on him. He had always believed he was better than quiet cruelty. That he valued honesty. Now honesty had teeth. It could destroy the fragile balance his family lived by. It could also destroy whatever thin connection remained. Daniel thought about his younger self, the one who tried so hard to belong. That version of him would have chosen forgiveness, no matter the cost. The man he was becoming wasn't so sure. Forgiveness felt like surrender when no apology had been offered. He checked his phone again. Still no message from his mother. The silence was louder than any argument. It told him everything he needed to know. She believed time would soften the edges, that he would calm down, that he always did. Daniel closed his eyes and took a long breath. He wasn't ready to act. Not yet. But he was done pretending nothing had changed. The betrayal had forced him to see the truth. And once seen, it could not be unseen. Revenge was no longer a sudden thought. It was a path forming in front of him, one step at a time. He didn't know where it would end. He only knew that standing still was no longer an option. The moment arrived on an ordinary evening, which made it worse. No warning. No dramatic build. Just a quiet shift that told Daniel this was it. This was the edge. He sat alone at his desk, the room lit by a single lamp. The city outside hummed. Distant and unaware. On his screen were the files he had organized over weeks. Messages saved from years ago. Notes written in moments he barely remembered. Facts that could not be argued away. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing false. Just truth. Lined up and waiting. Daniel's hands were steady. That surprised him. He read through everything one last time, fast and focused. Each line carried weight. Each detail had a consequence. Once released, the story his family told about itself would bend, maybe break. He knew exactly how it would. Spread. A few messages sent to the right people. A quiet email. No shouting. No public scene. Just enough to let the truth move on its own. He leaned back and closed his eyes. This was the power they had. Feared. His phone buzzed. Daniel opened his eyes and frowned. He hadn't expected anyone to contact him tonight. The name on the screen made his chest tighten. His mother. He stared at it for a long second before answering. Her voice came through calm, careful, familiar. "I was thinking about you," she said. "I hope you're doing okay." Daniel didn't reply right away. He listened to her breathing, slow and controlled. This was how she spoke when she wanted peace without conflict. "I know the wedding situation hurt you," she continued. "But I really did what I thought was best. Things were already stressful. I didn't want any issues." There it was again. Clean. Polite. Vital. Daniel looked at the screen in front of him, at the truth laid out like a quiet storm. He imagined telling her what he was about to do. Imagined her reaction. Shock first, then fear, then anger. Not because he was wrong, but because he had stepped out of his role. "Do you think I would have caused a problem?" he asked. She paused. "Just long enough." "It's not about blame," she said. "It's about keeping things smooth. You know how the family is." Daniel almost laughed. Almost. That was the word. Smooth mattered more than fair. Calm mattered more than honest. And he had been removed like an obstacle in the road. After they hung up, Daniel sat very still. The call had changed nothing, yet it had changed everything. Hearing her voice made the choice sharper, clearer. There would never be an apology. There would never be a moment where she admitted the hurt mattered more than comfort. He turned back. To the screen. His finger hovered over the button that would start it all. He pictured the fallout in quick flashes. Phone calls, accusations, family members demanding explanations. His name spoken with anger instead of dismissal. He would be seen then. But seen as what? A traitor. A problem. Proof that they had been right to exclude him. The thought slowed his breath. Daniel stood and walked across the room, pacing once, twice. His mind raced, but his body stayed calm. He wasn't afraid of what they would say. He was afraid of what he would become after. He had lived his whole life reacting to them, explaining himself, defending his tone, his timing, his feelings. Revenge felt like another reaction. Just louder. Stronger, yes, but still tied to their judgment. He stopped near the window and looked out at the lights below. Hundreds of lives moving forward without knowing his name. None of them cared about the wedding. None of them had decided who he was allowed to be. Daniel realized something then, sharp and uncomfortable. If he pressed that button, his family would still control the story. Even in revenge. They would talk about what he did, not why he did it. His pain would be a footnote. His exclusion would be justified after the fact. The narrative would tighten around him like it always had. He went back to the desk. The files waited, unchanged. Ready. Daniel sat down and placed both hands flat on the table. He felt the weight of the moment settle fully. This was the line. Cross it and there was no return. Walk away, and the hurt would not disappear. It would just change shape. He closed the main folder. Then another. One by one, he shut everything down. The room felt different instantly. Lighter, but not relieved. The anger didn't vanish. It cooled, settling deeper instead of burning outward. Daniel leaned back and stared at the ceiling. His heart beat slow and strong. He had chosen not to strike, not because they deserved mercy, but because he deserved freedom. He understood now that revenge would keep him tied to the worst version of himself, the one shaped by rejection, the one waiting for permission to matter. Walking away hurt more than acting would have. That was the truth no one talked about. Silence, when chosen freely, carried weight. It wasn't weakness. It was control. Daniel shut off the lamp and sat in the dark. Tomorrow, his family would go on believing they had made the right call. They would stay comfortable, unchallenged, untouched. But Daniel would wake up, knowing something they didn't. He had stood at the edge, holding the power they feared, and chosen himself instead. The decision didn't fix the past. It didn't heal the wound, but it ended the cycle. And for the first time since the wedding, that felt like enough. Life did not change all at once after Daniel made his choice. There was no sudden peace, no feeling of victory. The days simply continued, quiet and steady, as if nothing important had happened. But inside him, something had shifted for good. He woke up the next morning without the tight pressure in his chest. The anger was still there, but it no longer pushed him forward. It sat in the background, like a scar that reminded him of what had happened without controlling his next move. He went to work, spoke clearly, focused better than he had in weeks. For the first time since the wedding, his thoughts stayed in the present. His phone stayed silent. No messages from family. No follow-up from his mother. That silence used to feel like punishment. Now it felt like space. Distance he had not known he needed. Daniel realized how much energy he had spent waiting for approval that never came. Without that wait, his days felt longer, fuller. Weeks passed. The wedding faded from conversation. New topics replaced it. Birthdays, plans, small talk. Daniel was included in none of it. The exclusion remained, but it had lost its sharp edge. He no longer checked social media for proof of being forgotten. He muted family chats, not out of anger, but out of care for himself. One evening his mother finally called. Her voice sounded cautious, unsure. She asked how he was doing. He answered honestly but briefly. There was a pause, then a familiar attempt to smooth things. She spoke about moving forward, about letting time heal wounds. She did not apologize. She did not ask what he needed. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her he was taking space. Not as a threat, not as blame, just as truth. He said he needed to live without feeling like a problem. The words surprised him with how calm they sounded. His mother did not argue. She simply said she hoped he understood one day. After the call ended, Daniel felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The conversation confirmed what he already knew. Some people protect their choices by refusing to look at the damage they cause. Accepting that hurt, but it also freed him from waiting. Daniel began building a life that did not circle his family. He reached out to old friends. He said yes to invitations without wondering if he belonged. He found comfort in routine, in simple mornings, in quiet evenings when no one expected him to explain himself. Sometimes the thought of revenge returned. Not as desire, but as curiosity. He wondered what would have happened if he had spoken. If the truth would have forced change. If justice had been missed. Those thoughts came and went. They no longer stayed. He noticed something else too. The anger that once fueled him began to turn into clarity. He saw how his family operated, not as enemies, but as people driven by fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of being exposed. Fear of discomfort. Excluding him had been easier than facing what he represented. Understanding that did not excuse their actions, but it softened their power over him. Months later, Daniel ran into a cousin at a grocery store. The meeting was awkward, polite. She asked how he had been, mentioned the wedding briefly, then changed the subject. There was no apology, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. For the first time, Daniel sensed doubt. Not guilt, but awareness. He realized then that walking away had not erased him. It had made him unpredictable in a way they could not control. He was no longer reacting. He was choosing. At night, Daniel sometimes reflected on the day he almost sent the truth into the world. He thought about how heavy that moment had felt, how sharp the choice had been. He did not regret stopping himself. He did not regret the anger that led him there either. Both had taught him something important. Revenge had promised satisfaction. Healing had demanded patience. The difference was subtle but lasting. Daniel understood. Now that revenge often feels powerful because it gives pain a direction. But it also keeps pain alive. Letting go had not erased what happened, but it had stopped it from defining his future. He was still hurt, still disappointed, still aware of what had been taken from him. But he was no longer waiting for the family he wished he had. He was building something new, something honest. On a quiet evening, Daniel stood by his window again, watching the city lights. This time, there was no bitterness in his chest, only resolve. He did not need an invitation to belong. He did not need their approval to move forward. The wedding had shown him where he stood. His choice showed him who he was. And that knowledge, hard-earned and steady, felt like the truest form of peace he had ever known.